Hello and welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today, no matter what it is you're doing. For the free wire tutorial here today on YouTube, I'd like to share my wire bat design. Now you can size that down to make some earrings, you can create decorative items, wear it as jewellery, do exactly what you fancy. Now I've hammered raw copper for this piece, which is why it's so very reflective. It's catching that light beautifully today, but you can work with whatever wire you fancy. I'm just going to use standard 1mm or 18 gauge round wire, but you can change that up to your heart's content. Obviously if you work with a very much heavier wire, it's slightly more difficult to get those beautiful angles, but I will take you through the whole process here today. So here's my wire bat for today's design. I thought for a little bit of fun, next week we might have a go at something a little bit different. So next week we're going to be making a cat outline drawing based on my very, very popular hair design. I have moon gazing and leaping bunnies, and I use those quite a lot over the last 8 years. That's coming up next week, but this week we're going to go for a beautiful flying bat. As I mentioned earlier, I've hammered mine. You don't have to, you can use whichever size and gauge of wire you like. For a freestanding piece like this, if you were to size this down and make it into earrings, the very smallest wire you'd want to use would be a 1mm or 18 gauge. Any lighter than that, and even if you hammer it, it does risk being deformed during use or wear. I mean, if you're going to put it on the wall and nobody's going to touch it, then it's up to you what wire you use. I'm going to demonstrate today with some copper wire. This is a copper coated copper colour wire. It will react slightly differently to the raw copper, but it's what I have available, and I have around about 15 inches of that 1mm or 18 gauge wire. Now as ever, it really does pay to warm your wire first. So what we're going to do is grip a hold of one end of that really firmly and then run that between thumb and forefinger 3 or 4 times to get that nice and fluid. Now my choice of tools today will always be my quite finely tapered but not super needle-like bent chain nose pliers. You can achieve this project with standard plain chain nose pliers rather, but you may prefer to use something that's quite tapered or has a good fine point to it. So we're going to start in the very middle of that wire, and we're going to use our piece that we've already made as a reference point. Now in order to keep your bat symmetrical, and there's no law that says your bat does have to be symmetrical, but if you want to keep him symmetrical, we're going to start in the middle, and every time we do a manoeuvre, we're going to do another one on the other side. So very, very middle of that wire at the very beginning, I'm just going to put a very gentle little dome up on one side and then kink the wire immediately up. Trying to recreate that kind of size and distance and angle is what's key to creating that shape that you, if you are going for symmetry, then you will want to kind of keep those angles and distances as similar as possible. I'm then going to fine up those angles and bring them both quite sharply up. I quite like the idea of my bat having quite sticky up ears. I am not an expert in bats. I don't even know what an expert in bats is called. If you know, drop me a comment below and educate me. But I want to have a little dimple up at the top there, just so that his head isn't completely flat over the top. So I've got the inner section of those ears quite upright. What I want to do now is put an angle going down and out. And as I mentioned before, it really does pay. If you're looking for symmetry, you can measure these. I'm going to eyeball it, but I want to keep those angles vaguely similar if I possibly can. Now, you'll find that the wire will want to undulate slightly. It won't always be completely flat, but by the end of our shaping, it's ideal if you have this in a flat form, so that when we go to hammer it, if you choose to hammer it, we don't have any dramas as we move through. So what I want to do now is make those ears quite pointy, and in order to do that, I'm going to come to the very tip of those ears, open and close that a couple of times, and you'll see that you can get a slightly finer point. It's not a huge amount of difference, but it's enough for my desires just to make that a little bit sharper. So I'm going to invert the design and do the same thing. At this stage it will keep twisting around in your hands, don't worry about it, it's just par for the course. So you can pop those pliers in and move the wire whichever way makes you happy. You can also tighten it up slightly by supporting both the section nearest the centre and the wire coming away. Support both of those and then very, very gently pinch. If you pinch too tightly, you might end up with a finger pinch, which is no fun, believe me. What I want to do then is bring an angle back in towards the centrepiece, but I want that to be slightly above where the first half of the ear comes in. So if I just push that down, it's just above where that central section is, and that's how I want it to look. Obviously this is going to be your bat, so you can choose exactly how your bat is designed. I quite like the idea of those just crossing over in the middle for a second, and that gives me a chance to just make sure that I'm happy with all those angles and sizes. You could do yourself a little line drawing first. In fact, let me just move my hands out of the way for a second. If you wanted to do a screen grab, if you wanted to make something that's similar, then there's an opportunity to do a screen grab and print that out, and you can use that as a basis for your design. I know some people find it rather tricky to just say, well, go left here, go right there. I know I do when I'm taking directions for driving. Generally my lefts and my rights get a little bit muddled. So you can take as little or as much time as you want to make this your very own bat design. What I'm going to do now is start coercing the wire that's starting on the left back out to the left, and the same with the right, so that they no longer cross over. Because we warmed that wire to begin with, even though I'm not working with raw copper today, I'm working with a coated treated copper, it's still, because we warmed it, fluid enough for me to be able to just move that out slightly. Now you can have these perfectly straight if you prefer, so that they come back into a centre point, gives you a very, very angular jawline to your bat, or you can have a slightly softer variation. It's not anatomically correct, as I mentioned. I'm not a bat expert. The next thing I want to do is to have angles to define where the neck of the bat would exist. I don't even know if bats have necks. I do love them though. I think they're beautiful, furry little flying creatures. So I'm just going to take a look at that and see, maybe that's slightly larger than I wanted, so I'm going to slide those pliers up, getting my thumb in the way obviously, but I'm pushing the wire out at really quite a strong angle now. So I want to try and recreate that on the second side, and hopefully if I just draw that wire around, you'll see that I've got those completely lopsided. So if you do this, if this happens to you, what you can do, because we warmed that wire, is just gently nibble away at the wire with those pliers, open it back out slightly, pop them in slightly higher up, and you can generally, because you warmed that wire first, get away with resetting those angles. So that's still not quite far enough up, so I'm just going to put the pliers back in and then move that angle up slightly before reforming it. And now I'm a little bit happier with how that's looking. So the next curve that we're going to make will be a lovely sweeping arc shape. Now you can do this with tools if you prefer, but I tend to use thumbs and fingers just to get that to move around slightly, like so on this side, and then like so on the other side. Worldwide, there are over 1,400 different species of bats, which is amazing. So you can tweak this design to your heart's content. I'm just here today to give you a little bit of an idea about how I do my line animals. Next week we'll be coming back with a cat, and at some point in the near future I'll be sharing my moon gazing and leaping hares with you. Let's get back to the bat on the board. So keeping these arcs either side of the bat's ears close together for the moment will really help you to judge whether or not you're getting the symmetry that you're after. Now I can see that this still isn't 100% equal. I'm not going to let it worry me for the purposes of today's video, but you can obviously take time to make that a little bit more symmetrical if you choose to. So I'm going to bring both of those wires just up to the top over the bat ears, and that's where I'm going to start my next angle change. So if you sit the design as you would view it, I'm going to take the pliers above the tips of the ears to make that first angle change out on the side of the wing. Let's just spin that over to the other side and see if we can get that anywhere close to symmetrical. As I say, you can work to a line drawing if you prefer. That's going to work for the purposes of demonstration. What you may notice is that my wires are going off at a bit of a tangent, so I'm going to move that around until they sit just a little bit more evenly. Now you can keep this line on the top flat, or you can have just a little bit of an arc going on rather. So the next angle change is going to bring us very, very close to the first swoop, or the first arm, I suppose you could say. So I'm going to pop my pliers in and push the wire back until it meets that central section. Now it's not going to stay there, but let's just get that to sit into the very, very centre. And again, I'm going to guesstimate the distances here, but you can of course measure them. So let's just switch that one across as well. So he's looking a little bit unusual at this stage. Now, because most of my line animals are completely flat, this guy is a little bit different. He crosses over at the bottom, but I'm going to show you an alternative to that when we get there anyway. So the next thing we're going to need to do is arc the wire back out again. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can do this. I quite like to use fingers and thumbs, but what I am going to do is just start warming that slightly through and show you how you can use a tool to get these little repeated rainbow shapes to all be the same kind of size. So I have a marker pen. You could have a long triplet that is the same dimension all the way along. It does need to be a cylinder. Or if you wished to use one of your ring mandrels, perhaps pop a little mark on it so you know exactly the point at which you're going to use that tool to help you define the shape and form. So what I'm going to do is just pop my triplet, or my marker pen as the case might be, into position, and that's the shape I'm looking for. So I'll do that on the other side, but I'll try and do that in the opposite hand so we can see how that works. Now you can see that they're very uneven at the moment, so I'm just going to push that until they sit pretty much opposite each other, and then we're going to pick our next angle change. Now I don't want these arcs to be too large because I quite like the look of frilly wings. You can play around with this design endlessly basically, but I'm going to go for 3 main arcs on either side before it comes back down to create the base of the bat or the feet of the bat. You could just have 2 or 3. I suppose there's 4 in total if you count the little bit down at the bottom, but you can chop and change as you feel fit. The main thing is I'm making these sections quite pointy. So let's bring that marker pen in again and just grab the wire and push it around that form. So I've got 2 on this side, so I really ought to do a second one on this side. So again, you can measure if you prefer. I'm just going to push that back around. It looks reasonably okay to me. You can take a lot more time, as I am endlessly saying in my videos. What I want to do is show you the technique, not spend the entire day making my work 100% perfect. What we're looking for is to pass on the techniques rather than the fineries, or the finesse, I suppose the word is. So looking at the amount of wire I have left, I'm going to change my plan slightly and go for 2 main arcs and then bring those sections in together at the bottom, just so I've got enough wire to play with. So instead of having those 3 main sections and a gentle swoop at the bottom, I'm going to have 2 sections and then bring the wires together. So for that reason, I'm going to make this quite a large piece. One on that side. Pop the pliers into position and try to replicate the size and shape of those angles. I probably do have enough wire left to do another little jutty outy bit, but I'm simply not going to because I don't want to be caught short. So let's put that final arcing shape in. So if I push that down, you'll see it really doesn't take very much time to create one of these. Now this side is much deeper than this side. That's a really easy fix. Just by hand, pinch hold, and then you'll be able to just bring those 2 sections together. If you really hate how that looks with just the 2 main flappy sections, I'll put a third one in just to show you that even if you miscalculated your wire sizes, and what I might do is just put my ruler down for a second so you can get an idea of the size that I'm working with. This was about 15 inches of that wire, and he's just shy of 3 inches across. If I lift that slightly, you'll be able to see just shy of 3 inches. So in terms of the overall size, this section is around about 3/4 of an inch, and that's just slightly less. So let's just go right ahead and put another angle in, and we'll just give him some teeny tiny short little legs. So pushing the wires back into the main section of the body. Try to recreate that shape and size. They can graduate down and become smaller if you prefer. So it's entirely up to you how that turns out. I'm just going to take the tail of the wire here, and then what I'm going to do is open that out very gently so I can get better access to this last little bit. Kind of tricky to show you when the camera's so close. And what I will do is just pop this down on the board so you can see that this is kicking up. We're going to fix that in a moment, and by fix I mean we're going to smash it with a hammer, which is always good fun. So I'm just going to take a couple of seconds off camera to get my bat a little bit more symmetrical, just a little bit straighter in places, and then we'll move on to the last part of the demonstration. So my bat is far from perfect, but what I've done is just made sure that I'm happy with most of these. I haven't straightened out the bits where it's deviating from a 2D plane because I want to share with you how that will work on the block in just a second. So the last thing I'll do before we head to the block is just draw those two little tail or foot wires down, making sure that the peak of the arc is the same height from the ears or distance from the ears, and then I'm just going to trim away that last little bit of wire so that they match neatly, and I've got nice smooth flush cut ends to work with. So let's just push those out of the way for a second. So what I'm going to do now is bring my block in, which means I'm going to move the mat out of the way. There we go. Let's just pop that one up out of the way for a moment. I'm sure it'll all come tumbling down in just a second. So if I pop this to the side slightly, you'll still be able to see, and I won't end up hitting the camera, she said, hopefully. So what we need to do here is support the wire frame that we've made, or the wire shape. One thing that you can do, which I forgot to mention earlier, is just play with those angles. So if you want it to be slightly more open at the top, you do that before we get into the hammering. Keep the neck quite shallow, and then just push that around until it fits the kind of idea that you like to see. So the main key when you're hammering a wire form like this is to make sure that you're supporting the whole frame when you start hammering at one part, but also that no wires cross over. If I start hammering down and I accidentally stray my hammer onto a wire that's on top of another wire, I will weaken it to the point where it may snap. It will certainly put an ugly groove where you don't want it. If you do have any tool markings on your wire where you've changed direction or you've slightly moved an angle, don't worry, because we're going to hit it until it doesn't show anymore. So I'm just going to make sure that the frame sits how I want it to sit. You can employ tape if you wish to hold that bottom bit in position. I'm just going to use another part of my hand to hold that steady, and then I'm going to start just up at the top and set that shape. So what you will notice is when you move your hands away, things are starting to get flatter and smoother at the top, but this section may start springing around. If you wish to, you can just very, very gently get that to sit a little bit closer. Now what I'm not going to do is hammer the very, very end sections here because I want to turn them into little coils. So I'll do a little bit of coiling now. Very, very simple indeed, just to pop the pliers in and rotate that around. So I don't even have to do a complete turn if I don't want to, but I will today because it will look really lovely to intersplice those feet together. That's not a word, is it? Classic. So if I just flip that over, and I've got two small loops. They don't really need to be equal. It doesn't really matter. But once you've got them turned over, I'm going to support and make sure that those lowest sections of the wing are equal and opposite. Now those are starting to open up, and that is very, very common in your coils when you hammer them. You can close them up if you wanted to dangle charms or beads from them. And to do that, you would just grip exactly as if it was not a hammered piece. Just turn that over and get it to sit against the wire. So I'm just going to continue off screen now to hammer the rest of this shape into position, and we'll move on to the next section. So I've hammered my bat shape. He's got a lovely high shine to him now. You can see my tool marks. I'm not overly worried. You could simply flop it over the other way if that bothered you. What we're going to do now is just apply some last minute edits. So I can just slightly squinch those wings if I need to change the angles. Now you can, if you want to, just weave these two sections together. What I like to do with a design like this is kick one of those little curls up slightly, kick one of them down slightly, very, very gently indeed, and just hook them around so that they mix together. It's a very, very natural way to have your wire form put back together and to complete that circuit. Now you can see my bat is far from perfect, but you can mess around with that until it makes you happy. You can take a lot longer than I have. I hope you've enjoyed making wire bats with me today. I'm Gem Hawks. I'll be back next week making a wire form cat. variation on my ever popular bunny or leaping and moon gazing hares. I do enjoy making these little critters. So I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Thanks for watching. Do hit subscribe if you like the content, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.